waiting for. It's such an honor to have such a great keynote speaker for the STA and Fiber Buyers annual meeting. I'd like to thank Andy Warlick for arranging our keynote speaker. Thank you very much, Andy. It's so great that you arranged this for us. I'd like to call Andy Warlick forward, Chairman and CEO of Parkdale, to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Cameron. When Cameron Hamrick calls you up and says he needs a speaker for the STA and he'll give you an order for 2 truckloads of yarn, you do it. And so I'd like to make sure he understands that I've kept my end of the bargain.
Understood, sir.
And right now, we've had 2 trucks circling your plant for about a week, trying to find somebody to unload it. But it's my pleasure today to introduce to you our keynote speaker today, General Glenn Walters. Glenn's a 1979 graduate of the Citadel, and he's had a remarkable career, as you probably all read. Now, while we were at the Citadel, Glenn was somewhat of an enigma to most of us there, because you see, he was an electrical engineering major, which is, at the Citadel, is our hardest major on campus. And he was also a Marine scholarship student. So Marine, electrical engineering, they don't really go together. Most of the students back then in our engineering school were either Navy or Air Force. Those were typically the smarter guys than us Army and Marine guys. But he probably, I think he was the only Marine in the engineering school. So that tells you. But I will say this: he graduated with honors, and he held leadership positions the whole time we were there in our Corps of Cadets. And I will tell you, that engineering degree, that's been invaluable to his career. When he graduated, you know, he became a 2nd lieutenant, went into the infantry training as a 2nd lieutenant in the Marine Corps. And now while they're out there being trained on the gun range, you know, the gunny sergeant's got them all lined up, and he looks at the line and he says, "Light them up." Electrical engineering Glenn goes over there, finds the light switch, turns the lights on. But after serving as an infantry officer, the folks down in Pensacola, Florida, they recognize this guy. He's an electrical engineer. He says, we could make a pilot out of him. We could make a Naval Aviator or a Marine pilot out of him, but we'll let him fly that Marine stuff because he's an electrical engineer, and electrical engineer as a Marine, he'd probably know where the on-off switch is on most of the stuff we fly. So he went into the Marine aircraft and flew, all kidding aside, he's flown 41 different aircraft. He was also instrumental in a lot of the research and development of the Cobra attack helicopter. He also flew the tilt-rotor Osprey aircraft. Now, he never, ever flew the Harrier. You know, that death trap jet that takes off up this way and takes off, the Harrier jet? That was reserved for our graduates that graduated with history degrees or PE degrees. General Walters has been deployed on many occasions in the Pacific, Central Command. He's been in Korea, the Arabian Gulf, and Afghanistan. And he has been in many hot landing zones as a Marine officer and as a general. But one of the hottest landing zones I think he may have ever been in was in Southern California. You see, when your aviator call sign is Bluto, and you try to duplicate the cream puff pimple popping gag that John Belushi pulled off in Animal House, you try to pull that off with one of your fellow captain squadron squadron captains. When you do it and he ducks and you hit the base commander's wife. Yeah. That cost Bluto guard duty in a lawn chair and an umbrella guarding a seldom used airstrip in Death Valley. Now that was a hot LZ. But all kidding aside, really, after distinguished service to the Corps, Glenn was promoted to Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, the 34th Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. And the Citadel since 1842 has had a lot of four-star generals, but we've never had a general with this high rank at the service level. So Glenn is the highest ranking Citadel grad since 1842. And as Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, he's responsible for 138,000 Marines, 38,000 reserve Marines, and a budget of $42 billion. When he retired, he was selected to be the 20th president of the Citadel, which is our alma mater. And Glenn Walters, to me, is truly an American hero. He's a great American. He's a fantastic leader, and he's a heck of a scholar. And he's a pretty good shot with a rifle. So, ladies and gentlemen, General Glenn Walters.
Good morning.
Morning. Morning.
It's good to be here with you, and Andy, thanks for getting me down here, and I've really enjoyed last night. I'll set a couple records straight. I have a couple of notes that I'll go through. I'll tell you some stories about leadership. But the story I'm going to set straight is I was an electrical engineering major at the Citadel, and I did have a Marine Corps scholarship. My scholarship was for 4 years, and we graduated on May 12th of 1979. And it wasn't until my junior year, or my sophomore year, that my faculty advisor finally looked at my academics and said, "Did you know that you were signed up for a 5-year program when you signed up for electrical engineering?" And my answer, of course, was no. So the dichotomy of my position was evident. I'm going to the Marine Corps on May 12th, 1979. If I have my degree in hand, in other words, I do 5 years work in 4 years, I'll go to Quantico with a shiny little gold bar on my shoulder. And if I don't, it'll be a shorter trip to Parris Island where I start over from the bottom. So one of the reasons he probably didn't see me that much was because I was trying to pack in another, 60 credit hours over 3 years, but I made it by the skin of my teeth. But thanks for getting me down here. How many have had Andy Warlick at his house, at your house? Okay, you have some friends in the audience. One of the first traits of leadership is to know your enemy. And, when I took over in October of 2018, the next year was our 40th reunion. And somehow my classmates convinced me that it would be a really good idea to host our class at our 40th reunion and have a party at the president's house on campus. Now I did have some true friends that were my classmates. They said, well, remember, Andy Warlick has a habit of setting alarm clocks to 2 o'clock in the morning if he visits your house, short shooting your bed. So I got all this information before we had the reunion, and I actually had 2 cipher locks put on the 2 doors that he could access my bedroom. And it had a code that my wife would know, and I trained my wife on how to push this button and close the door, and then you hear it go zzz, and we're going to be safe. You know, But my failure in leadership that night was the last step of leadership, and that's supervision. I did not supervise my wife. And 2 in the morning, alarm clock went off. I found it under the bed, disarmed it, and then went back to bed and went to find one at I think 3:30. At that point, Gail was also awake, and I said, "This is all your fault of not following my training instructions." But ever since that, I do have my my house Warlick, or at least my bedroom Warlick proof right now. So a lot's been said about COVID. I think a lot of leadership had to be exhibited to get through COVID. I'll just tell you a short story about our school and about you and how you convinced us. Let me tell you a little bit about the Citadel. How many grads do we have in here? Just one. Another one? Okay.
Son's a grad.
There you go.
It's our class of 08, we're Italian Alpha.
Great. I was in 1st Battalion Charlotte Company. He was in a lesser battalion. He was in the number 2 battalion.
2nd Battalion, G.
Yeah. So when the pandemic hit and we had to send our cadets back home, and with a little bit of advice, because we didn't know, they wanted spring break. And we were told, hey, they might stay a week later. Okay. Take your books home just in case. You know, Chrysler cadets, take your, be specific. Take your computer and take your power cord so your parents don't have to find you a new one when you run out of juice. No, I never came back. That's the class of 20 graduated remotely. Right after that graduation, senior leaders of the college got together and we said, what's the one thing that we cannot let happen to this school? And that you can't break the long gray line. You have to have a freshman class that fall or you break it. It just wouldn't work with our system. So we started looking at what we had to do. Believe it or not, my facilities vice president, so I don't know about you, but we have a shortage of supply. So we can get around anything. What is it? Well, we have about 2 weeks of supply on toilet paper for the barracks. That could be a problem. That could be a problem. So we thought about it, and then someone had the bright idea that we would adjust all the bathrooms and latrines in the barracks and put in bidets. Once they explained to me what a bidet was and how you used it, that's when this is opening a can of worms that we'll never put back. So we worked on the supply chain. But we had to find ways, and I'm getting to the point of the story, is I didn't want anybody to leave camp, so I wanted all our hourly employees to be repurposed so that we could maintain ourselves. So I called Andy up and I said, do you have any cloth that we can make masks with in our tailor shop? Believe it or not, the military school has to have tailors because they all come in different sizes and all the uniforms have to be fitted, or they look like crap at parade and then the alumni yell at me. So one Saturday I came back to the house and there was this big bolt of cloth, and it's the MARPAT uniforms that I wear. It's that cloth, and Andy had dropped it off. So we started making masks out of those. Not really easy to breathe through. And I called him up. I said, look, Andy, we're bringing back the Corps cadets. We're bringing in the next class of 24. I got to have masks, just like everybody in the world is talking to all of you folks. I got to have masks. And he would say, well, how many you need? I said, well, I got that many cadets. We got that many for you. 17,000. And he had them to me in 2 weeks. And we put them in, and we issued 2 to each cadet. They were black because they were uniform, so they all wore black. Had a couple of faculty saying, well, let's let them buy their own. No, let's not. So, but he rose to the challenge when we needed him. So, and to me, that's leadership, and I know he displayed it. I'll brag on him. I know how many trips he made up to DC to support you and to support your industry, and I think you're successful. So, even though we play jokes on each other, including the fart machine under the chair at the parade, that was a good one too. Because I think one of the maxims of, there's a lot of maxims of leadership. The best one I'll give you a few. Don't lose your sense of humor. If you lose your sense of humor, you're gonna lose your workers. And you'll lose your Marines. I'm gonna go through a couple of stories, and then you can stop me if you want me to elaborate on any of them. But a couple of maxims, these are mine. There are no born leaders. If you see a young man or young woman who exhibits leadership by the time they're 6 or 7, you can look to their parents, their grandparents, and their family. That's where their solid foundation came from. Good leaders are made, and that's why leadership programs work. There's a USMC maxim about leaders eat last, and we do. It's a tradition for us. If you're in the field, the troops eat first and you eat afterwards. But there's actually a pragmatic reason for that. Because if you're in Afghanistan or Iraq where they're humping heavy packs, the troops are burning energy at 3 times the level that you are as you're traipsing along your sidearm and you're not carrying the base plate for an 81 millimeter mortar. So they need the energy more than you do. That's the reason we do it. Plus it keeps them full and ready to go. One of my first lessons learned, and Andy mentioned that I went to, was an infantry officer before I went to flight school. I was from 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, and I was the 81 millimeter mortar platoon commander. Anybody see an 81 millimeter mortar? Got a base plate about this big, solid steel, weighs 45 pounds, and you put the mortar on top. The base plate that weighs 45 pounds has 2 ropes on it. And I, as a young second lieutenant, right out of college, right out of Citadel, I'm trying to impress my troops. And the first time we went out to exercise the guns at Gulf 10 Impact Area Camp Lejeune, I told my gunnery sergeant Blish, who spoke with a deep rasp because he smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day and he'd already done 4 tours in Vietnam. I said, I'm going to carry the base plate. You go ahead, Lieutenant. So I did. I had my pack, I threw that on top, and the rule on Camp Lejeune was if you were more than 10 miles from the training area, they'd give you transportation out there. And I learned very early on, as I planned my training days, that there wasn't any place in that base that wasn't listed as 9.9 miles or less, which means we're gonna hump our stuff out there. So I did. I got my pack on, threw that damn thing over, and I know it was about a 10.5 mile hike. And we got out there, unlimbered them, set them up, went through the drills, shot a few zeroing rounds, got our aiming circles all done, we're done. Packed it all up, I put it on my back, got back to the barracks. I got up to the platoon area, and it's nothing but an office for me and the gunny, and then there was a head there with a shower. And I'm 22 years old. I'm feeling like an old man. I cannot stand up. I was hunched over, my back was killing me, and the gunny took pity on me, and he, didn't even take my clothes off, just stuck me in the shower and put hot water on my back. After about 10, 15 minutes, I could actually stretch it. But then I got upset. And this is where I learned my first lesson in leadership. Gunny, how do those Marines make it out and back carrying that thing? And he went, well, Lieutenant, they pass it off every 15 minutes. So now I'm really upset. Gunny, I'm the lieutenant, why didn't you tell me? And here was his words of wisdom that I remember to this day. Lieutenant, you never asked. So I took that to every position I've ever had in the Marine Corps, and I'll go out and ask the enlisted, the sergeants and the staff sergeants, the gunnery sergeants, ask them what I need to do in my new unit. Because the information was there, I just didn't ask. So make sure you ask those that have been before you. I mean, I would imagine if you had some cotton winding around something, you get someone like me down there, I'd probably lose my fingers before I ask the foreman, should I put my fingers near the... But that's some other examples of leadership, and I'm going to focus on enlisted leadership. I had a Lance Corporal who was a crew chief of mine in 1986, and we got sent over to the Persian Gulf to guard the reflagging of the Kuwaiti tankers, if you remember that, because Iran was schwacking them coming out of the Straits of Hormuz, and we were on the USS New Orleans, or excuse me, USS Okinawa, biggest pig boat in the Navy at the time. It was supposed to go into breakers, but they tried to get one more tour out of it. And so we went in there, and it was kind of boring. We'd fly up and down the Persian Gulf all day, looking for mines that the Iranians would float out. And we were there because we had a 20mm gun in front of our aircraft, and we saw one, we reported, and then they said, go ahead and sink it, and we'd shoot it and sink it. So, kind of boring. But I had one mission that had a lot of problems with my aircraft. I mean, radios weren't working, one of the hydraulics keeps flipping off, so I came back and landed, wrote them all up, and there's a Corporal Stoichkov. He was my crew chief, my plane captain. He took care of the aircraft and was in charge of it. No, he worked for me when we were back at Camp Pendleton, and he did something stupid. And UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, could have taken him off hours, I didn't. But instead I gave him one of those weed whackers, those handheld weed whackers, I mean, clear out all the weeds behind our office. And that night, there's nothing to do on ships. There's 3,000 of you, and no TV back then. So you walk on deck after the sun goes down, and I had to stand the duty at midnight. So I went up to my duty standing place up behind the bridge. I walked back to my aircraft because I was the first go, and there's Stoichkov on an ammunition bay that opens up that's only about 3.5 feet long. He's about 6'2". He's stretched across that darn thing sleeping. So I woke him up and said, why don't you go get some sleep down your rack? He said, no, I saw you're the first go tomorrow morning, and nothing's going to be wrong with this aircraft. So he just kept getting up that night, checking every system to make sure that I had a good aircraft that next day. So that's dedication. And I think it's probably because I didn't take a strike from him or let the CO take a strike from him. I just, we had our way of correcting the behavior that he had. But he's a great guy in the Persian Gulf. Fast forward a little bit to, I'll tell you a couple of stories and answer questions. I was privileged to serve in Iraq and Afghanistan. I spent most time in Afghanistan. And if you look at I was in a place called Helmand Province. Anybody been there? It's a shithole. Sorry. It's area about the size of Tennessee, and we had about 19,000 Marines covering the whole thing. Really good neighbors. To the south we had Pakistan, and to the west we had Iran. Really, yeah. I wouldn't buy a house down there. But we had a perimeter, and the English airfield was here. It's called Bastion Airfield, and then here's Camp Leatherneck bolted right to it. And around the whole thing was a perimeter with all these perimeter fences. But we didn't have enough troops to rotate them through all the lookout towers. So if you remember, we had a troop reduction, and so we didn't have enough troops. So we still had to do our mission. So what we did was put a little camouflage netting on all these things, and guards looked out. About half of them were dummies, behind them. So every other one was actually a live Marine with a weapon. So I, one evening, walked out and crawled up on one of those things and said, and it's hot as hell that day. So we saw a PFC, it said, how you doing? I'm doing good, sir. What do you need? What can I get you? And I was thinking he was gonna say, I could use some more chow. Water would be good. He just looked at me and says, I'm good, sir. You can bring me more ammo though, I might need it. So that's mission focused. And that's a PFC, probably 19 years old, knew what a job was and knew what he needed to do his job. So then there's this a story about a sergeant. I had people in FOBs, forward operating bases all over outside. This one's up north in bad guy territories. We took it over from the British, called FOB, Forward Operating Base Edinburgh. I probably had 60 Marines up there, and the infantry had a platoon minus, so it was probably 120 Marines on this small FOB, had a little place you could land. And one of their jobs was to watch this road that went into bad guy territory up in the mountains, and particularly to try and catch IED implanters who would try and blow up our convoys that were going up to resupply. And I got out there, and the young lieutenant who met me at the, when I got off the aircraft, went out in a Huey, and first thing she said was, what class were you? I said, what do you mean? And she was a class of 09 from the Citadel and was out there in 11. And she's the officer in charge. And so she said, I want to introduce you to this other sergeant here. So one sergeant had been watching this IED implanter, and out there, you know, you can't kill someone because you think they're the enemy. You got to prove it first. It's POI, POL, power life. You know, you have to establish that. And this one guy was watching this guy riding up and down on his motorbike. And he knows there's an IED implanter, but he hasn't done anything to allow us to do away with him. And then this one other sergeant took over and stayed on that target for 17 hours with an overhead balloon just watching it. And finally, after 17 hours of watching this character walk around, they finally saw him digging a hole in the middle of the road. We call them MSRs, main support routes. Digging a hole, and as soon as he put the ID in there, called in a copperhead round for 155 from about 15 miles away, and killed him, probably saved the convoy that we had coming in the next day. Tenacity, mission focused, and great training. And that, I gave him a medal. My aide had some, I had about a half dozen Navy achievement, Navy commendation medals, and gave that one a Navy commendation, a higher rank. But, great. Then I'll tell you about, this is a story about it was actually a female captain that I observed in the British Army. Over there we had teams of people who would disarm IEDs. And this is a base we had out to a little bit to the east. And they had this big balloon that, and the Taliban knew that up there were our sensors, so we could watch them. So they would have to bring that thing down about every 10 days, because you got to fill them back up with gas and remain up. It's not good for the optics if you let it fall to the ground. In fact, it's kind of a side story. When we first started putting those over there, first 3 balloons we put up in Iraq, or excuse me, Afghanistan, were actually balloons that were used in the Macy's parade in New York. We didn't have them. And they sent us to those. This was one of those, and he'd keep getting pumped up. So it came down, and they knew that that would allow some Taliban to get out there and put IEDs in there and try and hurt our people again. So they just happened to have a satellite, or put a satellite on that spot while the balloon's down. And sure enough, there's these two characters on motorbikes, and they dug in 3 IEDs across the road. And how those ordnance disposal folks worked, it was a joint. You know, there was a couple of Marines, a couple Army, and because we were an international unit there, it was in charge of a female Marine or female Army captain from England. And they would rotate who's gonna disarm, who's gonna put the big suit on, you know, you see. And it was her turn that day. So they went out and she disarmed the first one, and she dug the second one out. And it did what they call pre-detonation. Didn't really explode, it just kind of poof with a low-level explosion, knocked her on her butt. So she got up, and this is under the heading of dedication to your job. And she got up, they took that big helmet thing off, or gave her some water, and then there's actually a Marine staff sergeant said, "I'll get the last one." He says, no, it's my turn. You had your turn yesterday, I'll go back. And she did, and that one had been tripwire, and it exploded, and took some limbs off of her. They got her back to London, and her dad and mom were able to see her before she expired. But we wanted, for some reason, emotions get to you in a combat zone, and we wanted those two. We had pictures of them. So we decided we had to have some tactical patience. So we waited, and then I got assets in the air. Anybody know what a Hellfire missile is? Laser guided. It's got at least an 8,000 yard range to it. And it's silent after it peaks and starts coming down. So then we had a couple aircraft waiting. We pulled the balloon down, didn't need to be pulled down. And these two idiots came back out and redid it. And we got to launch this thing. And it got both of them before it buried itself into the berm and exploded. But that took about 6 of us trying to figure out how we would entice these two to do this again. And, do we wait for the next time? Let's not take the balloon down tomorrow because they'll think it's a trap. We'll go and take it down before it really had to come down, because then we had to, but it all worked out. And then I'd like to get in a conversation with you. I'm going to tell you this story about the CH-53D squadron I had over there. The CH-53D was a 1950s design. It had been replaced by the CH-53E, which could carry more. The 53D squadron over there was HMH-363 from Hawaii. They all knew that this was the last time these aircraft were going to ever be flown. In fact, the 6 of them they had there, we're going to take the engines out, some of the electronics, ship it back to them, and all this stuff. The rest of the stuff is going to rot in the desert over there. So about halfway through their deployment, they got about 3 months left. We had an accident. It wasn't by enemy action, but it was up north. And one of these aircraft had a catastrophic failure of the number 1 hydraulic system, took out the gas system, and the 6 Marines on board perished. Now I'm the wing commander, I gotta go talk to these folks. It was in the middle of the fighting season. There was actually a fighting season between, basically, whenever they wanted to start it in March, until November, when they all went down across the border to the Madras down in Pakistan to recuperate, and then also get recruits from religious schools down in Pakistan to start the fighting. Didn't mean they didn't fight, didn't leave people, but that's the fighting season, was that 6-8 months. So I knew we had to get this group of pilots and crew chiefs back in the air, but I knew we had to make them feel that it was, number 1, worth it, and the aircraft was secure. So I stood them down for 48 hours, which is kind of unheard of, during a combat zone in time that there's was kind of conflict. And I asked all the other squadrons to pick up the load for 2 days. Well, we looked at every one of those 53 Ds, and I let their people look at them. And they could decide whether they're gonna fly it or not, if it's gonna be fixed or not. So that happened in 48 hours. And I knew that I had to, and the young pilots and the young crew chiefs, they were not all that. I mean, we're gonna fly for 3 more months, geez, it's old. Not even gonna take them home with us. I told them we needed them. There's Marines out there kicking over mud walls and needed their support. We needed to refuel them, or resupply them, and bring them ammo, and we didn't have enough aircraft, so I needed them online. And I could look in their eyes when I was telling them this, I said, and I will fly the first flight with your commanding officer. A couple of them nodded a little bit, you know. And an amazing thing happened, and it was a female crew chief, sergeant. Let me tell you her story, and this is why it meant something. She had been in the wing aircraft of when their workup in Hawaii, watching the lead aircraft go into the water and kill those pilots and those crew chiefs. So she saw that. She was right north of we had a big kind of square place you can land in the middle of the desert with cloth stuff over that's anchored down to keep the dust. So you can land there and get some fuel to make it. And she was in her 53 and a Cobra with Al Reynolds, General Reynolds' son, was flying as commanding officer. And he let the lieutenant take off, and he hooked the skid and flipped it over. Al was fine. It killed the lieutenant in the front. She cut off the 53 to try and save him. Wasn't able. And then, of course, she saw 6 of her squadron mates perish. And I'm looking out there at these young pilots and these young crew chiefs. And I said, I gotta, how can I told them why we had to keep going, why it was important to the mission. But the one thing that got that squadron back online, because they all knew what this young sergeant had been through. And after I said, I will fly the first flight with your commanding officer, she raised her hand and said, General, can I be your crew chief? Just that one statement from young sergeant made what I was trying to do easy. If she's going to do it, we're going to do it. And they went on to have a really successful time. In fact, about 3 weeks after that, we took the first aircraft, ripped all the engines out, had the Hulk. I tried to make it an officers club. But it just didn't go with the non-alcoholic beer they would serve you over there. So I think I'd like to, in a conversation, answer questions that you have. But I think leadership, whether it's in the military or government, if you're genuine and the people think and believe that what you're doing is in the best interest of them or the country or your unit, they will follow you. And communications that walk around talking to them is the best. I got more information at my first colonel command because we had a smoke pit. Everybody's been in the military knows you know, they have a separate place. Ours was a picnic table. And that's where the smokers would go smoke, and there's a smoke bucket there. So I just started stopping by there. In the first month, I'd stop by there, they're all quieted down, they didn't want to say anything when I was there. But then they got normalized to me hanging out with them, just talking. And then that's when they started telling me, well, you know, sir, this would really be better if we could do that. Okay. You know, you'd be surprised at the most junior person who will come up with a solution. You know, we had an ECS failure on a V-22, and I can go into it, but this tube broke, and because it was going through at a high pressure, it put a hole into the firewall behind it. Damn Naviator engineers came down there looking at it. I don't know how we're going to do it to cut the airplane apart, put that whole thing in there. I asked this Lance Corporal, I said, what would you do to fix that? Sure, I could get a rivet gun and just stick a rivet in there and we'd go on with it. And the engineers went, okay. There's these high-pressed engineers and this guy, all right, sir, we got one, riveted it, and we're on our way. So those are my stories of leadership at the enlisted ranks. Any questions you have, I'm more than willing to entertain any conversation.
General, one of the things that we talked about a little bit was your impression of the Russian
Yeah.
Army and this Ukraine situation, maybe the difference between the training that Marines had versus what you observed with the Russian Army.
If you don't mind, this is my opinion, having been up in DC and watched this war start. If I go back in history, you got to ask, why did Putin invade? Why did he invade Ukraine? And by all measures that are on paper, he should have taken Kyiv in about 4 or 5 days. If his army screwed it up, it might take him a week. I mean, on paper, that was the analysis. Why did he invade? Well, sometimes you got to read what your enemies and what your adversaries write. He's been writing for 22 years that he wanted to get the band back together. Well, Soviet Union, Ukraine's a breadbasket. Then you can fast forward to, 2014. They invaded Crimea, which was part of Ukraine. This country didn't do anything except send them, if you remember, blankets and food, no military weapons. So Russia took Ukraine. And our president at that time was the vice president when that happened. Then the next thing happened was he saw us pull out of Afghanistan. And if you look at the stat, and our classmate was a CENTCOM commander, so I got some insight. But that was not an American mission in Afghanistan. Article 5 of the NATO Charter is the article that says once attacked, all are attacked, and all will defend. But first time in world history, in NATO, when the terrorists struck us on 9/11, NATO invoked Article 5. And the perpetrators came and trained in Afghanistan, so that's where the Afghanistan war started. But it was under a NATO flag. So when we unilaterally pulled out our last 2,500, Putin viewed that as us fracturing NATO. So he thinks we're weak, we won't give him anything. He thinks that NATO is fractured because of how we got out of Afghanistan. So in his mind, that was the perfect time to invade Ukraine because he would get no reaction from the West. That was his biggest miscalculation. And he found out one other thing. We hadn't been sitting on our butts since 2014 when he took over Crimea. Marines and soldiers had gone over there and had taken the Ukrainian army, which is nothing more than a subset of the Soviet army, and we retrained them in the way of war. The Soviet way of war is very, very top down. It should not surprise you that there's no initiative at the lower levels of the Russian army just by viewing how many colonels, lieutenant colonels, and generals got killed in combat over there. If a general is on the front lines for something other than just a visit and to see how it's going, but you're down there to try and fix something, that means your chain of command stinks. The NCOs and the lieutenants have no initiative because they've never been taught to have it. The American way of war is to enable sergeants, corporals, lieutenants, captains to see the situation on the ground and not radio back to a general 20 miles away and ask permission or ask what to do. All they should call us for is, I need more ammo, I got wounded, send me an airplane. We train them how to fight because they have seen the situation on their battlefront. And you see that not displayed by the Russian army, but in 8 years, the Ukrainians seem to learn the lesson. So in the end, that was a war, in my opinion, between the American way of war, command and control, and fighting, and the Soviet way of war, which hadn't changed since they massed 3 million men on a line and just overwhelmed by force. They don't have it anymore. Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, I had a question actually about China. So obviously President Xi has made as part of his strategic plan to build up their military assets. And it's scary how quickly they are acquiring technologies, building out technologies that rival the United States in some attributes of the things that they have purchased. And, you know, obviously we're seeing in a post-COVID world, sort of this strategic supply chain is being challenged, whether it was semiconductors. I'd be interested in your perspective on what you think the Chinese plans are with respect to Taiwan and the economic, what that could do for the global economy, and how the U.S. should be responding now in preparation for what I think is an eventuality that the Chinese will evade.
Yeah, so the one China policy, which is what we lived under for, 5, 6 decades, post-World War II, we acknowledged that Taiwan was a Chinese island, but we also said it's a democratic island, and we're going to support them mostly through military sales and training. In fact, when I was a lieutenant colonel, I trained about a dozen of their Cobra pilots for the island. Strategically, up until I believe that Peng and the Chinese Communist Party believed up until just recently that they could defeat us economically, and they viewed our non-participation or non-reaction to a lot of their moves in this hemisphere. Before I retired, I went to Southcom, which has South America. They are building radar sites and things down there. You know, the news last week, you know, and this is all unclassified. I haven't had a classified brief in some years. In the paper, they're moving into Cuba. You know, sounds like 1963 all over again to me in the Cuban Missile Crisis, except it's the Chinese, not the Russians. I believe they will not take their foot off the throttle of trying to economically destroy us, and the way to do that is to steal our secrets. You know, even in higher ed, there's a lot of universities that have the Confucius system in it, and that's you know, it's kind of like American universities. We used to put American universities in Beirut, you know, and we have American professors over there. That's the model that they use, but they don't teach the hard sciences or literature. You've seen in the last 2 or 3 years a couple of, and until our government says, you know, if you're an R1 school, research, if you're taking money from the Chinese for a Confucius Institute, you're not going to get research money, because that's where they try and merge, so they can cross-filter that, because they do steal a lot of our technology. I think the one positive factor in the last year has probably been, I think China and Russia, I forget what they call it, their friendship for life, or, you know, pinky rings or whatever the hell they're calling it. But, you know, you saw Xi Jinping and Putin, you know, shaking hands, and, you know, the solid friendship forever and ever. You know, and then, of course, Putin starts getting his butt kicked in Ukraine and asks for some military relief. In other words, he needs some ammo, because they all fire the same stuff. I mean, most of the Russian stuff, weapons and things like that, are replicated in China or directly shown. If you go out and buy an AK-47, more than likely you're going to buy an AK-47 that's made in China, not in Russia, from the Kalashnikov factory. but they use the same ammo. It's Russian shorts, 7.62 by 39 stuff. But I think when that happened and Putin didn't take Kyiv in the time frame, and after about 4 or 5, 6 months, I think it gave Xi some pause on Taiwan. Now he's agitating on Taiwan, but I think it's, for me, he doesn't have the capabilities to really take it over. He could wipe it out, but he couldn't take it over. Because you gotta put boots on the ground, and he doesn't have a way to do that right now. He's got 100 miles of the China Straits to go, and we've wargamed this numbers of times. And until I see them build amphibious forces, what they're really enamored with right now are going against us one-on-one with aircraft carriers and submarines. It's been a while since I've seen the capability match up. The one thing that the Chinese, the mistake they made, Russia has one aircraft carrier. And I forget the fuel, it's that black sludgy stuff. It burns that stuff. They had built 3. They gave one to the Indians. They sold one to the Indians and sold one to the Chinese. And of course, if you look at the Chinese aircraft carriers they're building now, they look exactly like the Russian one. It was a shitty design when they built it. I mean, they still have theirs over there. I think in the last 12 years, it's been at sea 2 weeks, something like that. It gets out of the harbor, breaks down, they have to tow it back in. So I think there's some pause about what his real military capabilities are. But there's no doubt in my mind, I mean, he's president for life now. And I think the one thing I learned about the Chinese is they're very, very patient. I've met some of their officers. They actually have, I think I told you a story last night, I don't know if I remember, but in the Berlin Air Show 5 years ago, I was over there, I'm over there trying to get the Germans interested in our new heavy lift helicopter, the 53K, because they really needed it, because their stuff was old. And met with Angela Merkel and her defense again. They had a difference of opinion on what 2% GDP meant, and we argued about that instead of whether we wanted this capability in Europe in one of our larger partners. But our new aircraft was on static display, and I wasn't in this uniform, I was in the green uniform. It looks like this. I'm at the air show and I'm looking around at the other stuff, just like you're looking at us. And there's a Chinese colonel and 2 majors. They were looking at our new aircraft, and one of them had a camera, so 2 of them would stand by the nose of the aircraft and take a picture, and he'd chase them around to the side and take a picture there, and he just worked his way around 360 degrees, so he had this panoramic photo montage of our new aircraft, and we wouldn't let him in the cockpit. That's where our new technology was. But as a, maybe because I thought I was a wise ass or something, I walked up to the Chinese colonel and go, "You want to buy some?" Now here's his answer. You got to give him credit. He had a sense of humor. He knew at least he had been briefed on Western humor. And he goes, "Just one." So, it took me back because we have this view that they're monolithic and all one thought. Don't believe that. I knew about 5 years ago they started to get really serious about warfighting because the Chinese Navy, Chinese Air Force, and Chinese Army were all 3 different entities, never worked together under different generals and admirals who didn't get along. Ping actually forced them, after studying it for about 30 years, they said, we're going to adopt the American command and control method. So they actually put together a joint staff to try and integrate all of their forces. And that's the scariest thing I've seen. It's going to take them a while to get it right. You've got to actually have to do something with that. But the value or the benefit of the American way of war is we integrate Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Space Force now. It's all in a joint commander, and he has staff who are from all those services. So you can take all those capabilities and integrate them in a plan of attack or defense that'll be superior to what your enemy has. And that's because we all bring different strengths. That's the one thing that scares me a little bit, and I'm gonna watch. And they have not yet exercised it yet. But if they ever have a joint exercise, and they learned this from us. They learned it from our joint exercises in Korea. They watched that stuff for 50 years. They're not as Americans, we want results quickly. I mean, if I want a hamburger, I'm gonna go get a hamburger. I'm not gonna go buy a hunk of meat and grind it myself and put it in a patio, although, you know, it's fresher and all that. No, I'm gonna go buy a hamburger. The Chinese model would be to go get me a calf and we'll raise it for 2 years and we'll make really good hamburgers in 2 years. And that's just a difference in philosophy. We want instant results. They're much more patient than we are. So, I hope that answers your question. Anyway. Yes, sir.
I've seen several articles lately about low enrollment across all the services.
Yeah.
Is that being recognized, or are they doing anything about that? What's your take on it?
It's true. It's true because the propensity to serve is based on a lot of cultural issues. I think there's some cultural issues in the country right now that are keeping people from deciding to go in. I just read an article 2 days ago. How many Navy veterans in here? The Navy is offering a $75,000 enlistment bonus if you'll enlist in the Navy and you're qualified to go into the nuclear program, nuclear submarine sailing. The Army has been they're always a little short of their goal, but they're 40,000 recruits short. Navy's, maybe 10, the Air Force, probably 10. Marine Corps, we're still making it. We used to have, it's affected us also. When I was on active duty, on the beginning of the fiscal year on 1 October, our recruiting command already had 60% of the contracts they need for the next year signed. You call it start pool, so we're all 60%. It's down to about 30, but we still get to make it. But I think when you focus away from the primary mission of the United States military, which is defend the country and attack our enemies when directed by the president, and that's the only thing you're there for, to be successful in combat. The rest of the stuff is not important. The team will always make it through. And the team you build in training, from boot camp to your initial training in your unit to your eventual deployment or employment overseas, that's where you build the team right there. All these other things that they're trying to put on the plate of the commanders have got to go away. The military needs to be apolitical, because as a general officer, and I think I told you this last night, I was a general for 10 years in the Marine Corps. I knew I'd be serving under at least 2 or 3 different presidents. So I did not vote in presidential elections during my time as a general officer, because I wanted to do my duty as described in the Constitution of the United States, and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I didn't want any implicit favoritism. So that's how I selected to make sure I did my duty right. That's why we frown on, and in fact we forbid any military person wearing a uniform on active duty to go campaign for a political candidate. Can't do it. In fact, Senator, Virginia.
Warner?
No, not Warner, the other one. Kane. Kane's son went in the Marine Corps. And I had to call him up. He was a second lieutenant down at flight school. I had to call him up and said, don't go to your dad's campaign if you want. Don't wear your second lieutenant uniform. We have to keep that in our military pure, in my opinion. They're there for one reason only: serve and protect the country, defend it, and not get into any of the other things. And so we don't have a lot of that stuff. I mean, we have core values: honor, duty, respect. And those three simple words, every problem in life can be hosted on one of those three words, and you can find the solution to whatever problem you have. I don't know if that answers your question, but I acknowledge, I think I know where you're going, and I'm agreeing with you. Yes, sir.
General, I have a question for you about leadership.
Okay.
My one and only experience with the Citadel occurred about 25 years ago when I was invited to go with some other fathers and sons for what proved to be an ocean kayaking adventure. And part of the experience was to spend one night in the barracks in the middle of the summer in the Citadel. And I'll have to say, the next morning when we got up to begin our adventure, it became conspicuously obvious that after the most horrific, unrestful, sweaty, hot, horrible night of my life, it became conspicuously obvious to me that our host was more refreshed than he'd ever been. And I couldn't understand it. And finally, the truth was revealed that there happened to be one barrack, if that's the right word for it,
One room.
that was air conditioned.
Yeah.
And that wasn't revealed in the beginning. And my question for you, sir, is would that be a good example of leadership?
It's a shitty example of leadership. It's a shitty example of leadership. Well, let me tell you what's changed in 25 years. So when Andy and I were there, I mean, I think we went through it last night. I mean, what was air conditioned in 1975 when we got there? No barracks were air conditioned.
Right.
No rooms. The chapel was, and the library was, and the infirmary was. All right, like two of those three places I was okay going to. I didn't want to go to the infirmary. But now all of them are air conditioned. And you know why? I mean, because when he and I were there, freshmen, you weren't allowed to have a fan. I mean, you got a fan sophomore year, that's pretty good benefit, right? We open those windows up and pray for a breeze. But they're air conditioned now, and I have, believe it or not, I got, alumni. Oh, you're making it easy on them. When I was there, no air conditioning. And then you tell them, look, most of their education right now is they're online. They do all their work on computers. We make them buy computers to go to school. You can't keep the computers in that kind of condition and have them survive. But it still piques them a little bit, Now the big complaint is when we, campus-wide, there's a big switch. We're going from air conditioning to heat. Boom! Okay, you're never going to time that right. And generally, it's during the spring. You had one hot spring day. Turn the air conditioner on. Okay, you all want it on. But if it gets cold next week, you got to put your blankies on. So, but no, that's not good leadership. It's not. It's a shared hardship. Was it you?
I put that whole trip together, and now he's complaining.
No, I was complaining then.
No. What else?
General,
Yes, sir.
my son and I alluded to a while ago, graduating in 08. My youngest son is a 2016 graduate, football member of Charleston Southern University.
Oh, dear.
When the Buccaneers beat the Bulldogs back-to-back seasons, all hell broke loose in the Smith house.
Yeah. Well, I think we got a new football coach.
I was going to say, at this point in time, does the Citadel have a strategic plan? Because I just sent my son a picture that says, hey, look, a Citadel graduate.
Yeah.
The picture of you.
Oh, dear.
Somebody asked me, has the Citadel got a strategic plan to beat the hell out of the Buccaneers?
Well, that's actually not strategic. That's just operational and tactical. We just, we have a new football coach. We're really excited. In fact, Thanks for asking that question. I'll give you another example of leadership, but it's in Maurice Drayton, our football coach. He came down here. He was with the Raiders. He'd been in the NFL for 7, 8 years. We got him to come down here. He hired his 10 coaches, and we have this thing called the visiting team facility. It's nothing but a big block of 26 rooms that exactly replicate the rooms in the barracks. We use it for overflow or for teams that are coming in. His coaches stayed in there until they could find a place to live. But Maurice had 2 houses because he's from the Charleston area. And he stayed in there with them until every last one of them was placed. The second thing I noticed about him, I'm the college president. I have an athletic director. A lot of alumni think that I picked the coach. I would be an idiot to pick a coach. You know, I know Andy played football. I love watching football. I love the strategy and the tactics of football. But I've never coached a football team, and I wouldn't know the first thing about. I can tell you good. I think Joe Gibbs is a good coach. Why? I decided that after he won. That's how I determine good coaches. Did you win? So I can't judge it. I'll let the athletic director do it. But even with that, he called me up and said, "General, are you okay with me coming down?" I said, "I'm excited." The thing that showed me he had character and one of those 3, honor, duty, respect, was about a month ago, the athletic director got a call from an NFL team and said, "We're going to make Maurice this offer to come back, and it was going to be much more than we could pay. And it would also help him off in his NFL, once you have X number of years in there, you're vetted in their retirement system, and at this pay level with his 3 more years on this contract, it would have set him up for life." But so the athletic director couldn't do anything but say, "I hope he doesn't take your phone call," but he did. He told that team, said, "I can't go. I just hired 10 men to come down here and coach football. I'm not going to leave them down here by themselves and for my own gain." So I think with a coach with that character, and I know they have a new president out at Charleston Southern, maybe there's an opportunity there. Of course, our big one, we always want to beat VMI. So. Anything else? Yes, sir.
You still fly, General?
Not military aircraft, but every now and then someone has a little thing I can fly around, Cessna kind of thing. My big plan, and this is to tell you how generals are don't always get their way. My big plan when I retire, I was going to build me an experimental kit plane, short coupled, twin, biplane with a probably 150 pound or 150 horsepower motor on there. You can build it by kit, and it's got 2 places, fully acrobatic. I don't have that airplane right now. I got a 27-foot Sea Ray that my wife likes to go out in the Ashley River and drink wine on. So we all have priorities. Mine's not fit yet. Yes, sir.
Just want to thank you for your service, number one. And when Andy introduced us last night, we were busy. I didn't want to, interrupt anybody. But I did some work with DOD, General Dynamics, Textile, some of those guys on the resection, Z-Hall, so they wouldn't have to put sandbags on the floors anymore, and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Spent a lot of time with EDOT up at Camp Lejeune. I want to know, did they ever get rid of those owls up there that were keeping everybody from shooting anything?
Yeah, I mean, the owls are still there. I think one of them's an endangered species. I actually tried to get the damn things down to my hangar when I had a hangar at New River, because all the sparrows are coming and crap on all the birds. And we put the fake owls up there. They didn't care. When we finally got the wildlife folks to put a live owl nest, I mean, he still pooped, but it's only one. We can take care of that. But I had a great time up in. That was my first duty station at Camp Lejeune in 1979. In fact, were you in the military?
No, I lost civilian, but did a lot of work with Buffalo and those type.
Okay. You know, in the military, the one lesson I learned was before we had electronic records, all your shots were on a yellow card. Remember that? And I went to 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines. We got put on the air alert because Ayatollah Khomeini's folks took over our embassy. And we were on the air alert. We had to be ready to go in 48 hours. So you start going through the admin and stuff. And one of the things is, got to make sure everybody's up on shots. I'm a lieutenant. And I'm just got out of basic school. I know my shots are up to date because they gave them all to me there. And Corman from the company came up and he said, "Hey, Lieutenant Walters, you got your shot card?" I go, "No, it's in my medical record." "No, it ain't." So, "Yes, it is." "No, it ain't." And, "Yes, it is." We went back and forth until we finally realized, I realized the inevitable. It's not there and I don't have it. So how they get you through a shot line, there's 17 shots. And I'm pretty sure if there's a doctor in the house will say, this is not good medical practice. They would put this little cardboard thing around with all the shots listed with a box. It was a check in a box. You went through the gauntlet line and they had those air-powered shots that just shoot them into your skin. And every one of those shots is there and the guys are just watching, you know, okay, I got the typhus. Oh, here, he needs one. Ching. So I put mine on, every freaking thing was marked. So I walked through that line, I got 17 shots. And Gunnery Sergeant Blish, I told you about, he's still with me. You know, I'm marching a platoon back, and it was about, you know, half a mile of barracks, and I just face planted in the dirt, and I heard that raspy voice, "Oh, shit. 2 of you guys grab Lieutenant. Let's go." So they carried me back, and now I knew. And then, of course, after the fact, years and years later, one of my flight surgeons said, "Did you ever get all 17 shots at once?" "Oh, no, that's just right. No, interactions, no." I guess in 1979, it really didn't matter.